What if everything we take for granted, our cities, our laws, even the way we communicate, had to be invented from scratch? Picture a world where no one had ever written a word, where justice was arbitrary, and where the very idea of living together in large communities seemed impossible. That was reality for humanity before one extraordinary place changed everything: ancient Mesopotamia. Nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this land didn't just create the first cities, it built the blueprint for civilization itself. And the most astonishing part, the innovations born here 5,000 years ago still echo in our lives today, from the way we keep records to the laws that govern our societies. Think about the last time you signed a contract, checked the time, or even read a street sign. None of those everyday moments would exist without Mesopotamia. This was the place where writing leapt from clay tablets into history, where kings carved the first legal codes into stone, and where farmers turned wild landscapes into thriving agricultural hubs. But this isn't just a story about ancient inventions, it's about the human genius that solved problems we still grapple with today. How do you organize thousands of people into a functioning society? How do you ensure fairness when disputes arise? Mesopotamia didn't just ask these questions, it answered them in ways that would shape the future of every culture to come. So why does this ancient civilization matter to you? Because Mesopotamia's legacy isn't locked in the past, it's woven into the fabric of your daily life. Every time you use a calendar, every time you rely on a system of measurement, even every time you expect justice to be served, you're touching ideas that began here. Over the next few minutes, we're going to step into the shoes of those first city dwellers, traders, and scribes to uncover how they transformed chaos into order. By the end, you'll see the modern world in a whole new light, because the story of Mesopotamia is, in many ways, the story of us all. So let's travel back to where it all began. The Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers didn't just provide water, it created possibilities. Imagine a place so rich in soil that early farmers could grow surplus crops for the first time in human history. That abundance changed everything. No longer tied to the daily struggle for food, people gathered in larger numbers, building mud brick homes that eventually grew into towering ziggurates. Cities like Uruk and Ur weren't just collections of houses, they were experiments in human cooperation. Thousands of people now lived cheek by jowl, sharing resources, trading goods, and facing problems no nomadic tribe had ever encountered. How do you distribute grain fairly when harvests vary? Who settles disputes when neighbors clash over property lines? This was the crucible that forged civilization. Unlike earlier societies that simply reacted to their environment, Mesopotamians engineered solutions. They dug intricate irrigation canals to control the river's unpredictable floods, turning marshlands into farmland. They established trade routes stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, exchanging textiles for precious metals and timber. But perhaps their most revolutionary breakthrough wasn't a physical invention. It was the realization that complexity required record keeping. When temple priests needed to track grain stores or merchants sought to document debts, they pressed reeds into wet clay, creating the world's first written symbols. What began as simple tally marks for counting sheep evolved into a full writing system, Cuneiform, that could record laws, legends, and even personal letters. This shift from memory to written record didn't just preserve information, it transformed how humans thought. For the first time, knowledge could outlive its creator. A contract etched in clay carried weight across generations. A king's decree became immutable once inscribed. Mesopotamians weren't just building cities, they were constructing the very framework of modern society, one clay tablet at a time. And as we'll soon see, their innovations in writing would spark another revolution, the idea that rules should apply equally to all. because when you have written words, you can write laws. And when laws exist, justice stops being a matter of who shouts loudest and starts becoming something measurable. That leap from oral tradition to codified rules would change humanity's course forever. The scribes pressing styluses into clay 5,000 years ago probably didn't realize they were laying the foundation for everything from property deeds to constitutional governments. But their breakthrough solved the essential problem of civilization: how to create order when thousands of strangers must live together. And that solution began with marks in mud that could speak across centuries. Picture a Mesopotamian merchant 5,000 years ago, standing in the bustling market of Ur with a problem: how to remember that 12 sacks of barley went to the temple, 8 to the city granary, and 3 to a trader from distant Elam. Fingers and memory weren't enough anymore, so he pressed a reed into soft clay, marking wedge-shaped symbols that could speak even when he couldn't. What started as simple scratches to count goods would become humanity's first great intellectual leap: cuneiform writing. At first, these marks were just pictures. A drawing of a fish meant fish, a stalk of grain meant grain, but as cities grew more complex, so did the symbols. By 3200 BC, scribes had refined them into abstract shapes, turning clay tablets into durable records of everything from tax receipts to marriage contracts. Imagine the moment when someone realized those wedges could do more than tally sheep. They could capture human speech itself. A symbol no longer just represented an object. It could convey sounds, ideas, even emotions. Suddenly, a temple hymn or a king's decree could outlive its creator, speaking across generations. One of the most astonishing survivals from this era is the Epic of Gilgamesh, etched onto clay tablets nearly 4,000 years ago. Here was no dry inventory list, but a sweeping tale of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning, proof that writing had unlocked storytelling itself. Yet cuneiform wasn't just for poets and priests. Archaeologists have found tablets recording everything from court cases to medical remedies to remarkably ancient complaints. One tablet from Ur reads like a Yelp review from the Bronze Age, a customer furious that his copper delivery was substandard and delayed, but writing's true power lay in how it reshaped society. When laws could be carved into stone pillars for all to see, like Hammurabi's famous code, justice became less about who had the loudest voice and more about consistent rules. Contracts etched in clay gave merchants confidence to trade across borders. Temple archives ensured that knowledge didn't vanish when elders passed away. For the first time, humans could build upon ideas across centuries rather than starting fresh with each generation. This revolution didn't happen overnight. Learning cuneiform required years of schooling, with young scribes practicing hundreds of signs on recycled clay tablets. Yet those graduates became Mesopotamia's administrators, diplomats, and scholars, the world's first educated class. Their work didn't just record history, it made history possible. Because once words could be preserved, humans could organize on scales unimaginable before. City-states transformed into empires, governed by written decrees rather than shouted orders. And as we'll see next, that shift from oral tradition to written law would lay the foundation for every legal system that followed. Those early scribes hunched over their clay tablets weren't just record keepers, they were the architects of modern bureaucracy. Think about the last time you filed taxes, signed a lease, or even checked a spreadsheet at work. Every one of those mundane tasks traces back to the bustling temple complexes of Mesopotamia, where scribes meticulously tracked every sack of grain, every day of labor, even every goat lent to a neighbor. Without them, cities would have collapsed under their own complexity. The Adaba, literally tablet house, was where this revolution began. Picture a classroom from 4,000 years ago, boys from elite families sitting cross-legged, recycling old clay tablets by smoothing them with water, practicing hundreds of cuneiform signs until their fingers ached. Mistakes earned beatings from stern teachers, but mastery opened doors to power. Graduates didn't just become clerks, they rose to manage entire sectors of the economy. One tablet from Lagash lists over 18,000 workers. Each name, role, and ration carefully recorded. This wasn't just paperwork, it was the lifeblood of civilization. What's astonishing is how familiar their work feels. A temple inventory from Ur reads like an ancient spreadsheet, columns for dates, quantities of barley, even notes on quality control. Merchants used contracts so detailed they'd hold up in court today. One agreement from Sippar specifies the exact purity of silver owed, with penalties for late payment. And just like modern auditors, scribes caught fraud. A tablet from Umma exposes a corrupt official who'd skimmed grain by faking delivery records, but all this record-keeping exposed a deeper problem. When disputes arose, over land, debts, or even inheritance, who decided what was fair? For centuries, justice depended on local elders or the whims of kings. Then came a breakthrough, the idea that laws should be written, public, and apply to everyone. The Code of Ur-Nammu, carved in stone around 2100 BC, was the first to try. If a man commits murder, it declared, he must be killed. Simple, yes, but revolutionary in its clarity. No longer could the powerful exploit vague traditions. Now, even the humblest farmer knew his rights. Yet it was Hammurabi's Code a few centuries later that perfected the system. 282 laws covered everything from property damage to medical malpractice, each carved into an 8-foot stele for all to see. An eye for an eye wasn't just about punishment, it set limits. A surgeon who botched an operation paid a fine, but only if the patient was a commoner. For harming a noble, his hands were cut off. Harsh by today's standards, but for its time it was staggeringly precise. This shift from oral custom to written law didn't just resolve conflicts, it built trust. Traders from distant cities could do business knowing contracts would be honored. Farmers appealed to courts rather than taking revenge, and crucially, rulers themselves were bound by the rules they set. When a later king tried to cancel debts, he didn't just announce it, he had scribes etch the decree on tablets distributed across the kingdom. Sound familiar? It's the same principle behind every modern legal system. The idea that words etched in stone or parchment or digital code can hold societies together. Mesopotamia's greatest invention wasn't the plow or the wheel, though both changed history. It was the radical notion that humans could govern themselves not by force but by shared rules. Those scribes tallying barley in temple storerooms were laying the groundwork for constitutions, courts, and even the concept of citizenship. Next time you glance at a traffic law or sign a lease, remember, you're participating in a system that began with wedge-shaped marks in wet clay. Standing 7 feet tall in the center of Babylon, Hammurabi's stele wasn't just a list of rules, it was a declaration to the gods and people alike. At the top, carved in bas-relief, the sun god Shamash hands the king the sacred rod and ring, symbols of divine authority. Beneath them, 282 laws sprawled in meticulous cuneiform, covering everything from stolen livestock to faulty construction. If a builder's house collapses and kills the owner, one law states, the builder shall be put to death. Harsh, absolutely, but consider the alternative. Before Hammurabi, justice often meant blood feuds or arbitrary rulings by local strongmen. The code's infamous eye for an eye principle wasn't just about revenge, it was about proportionality. Harm a commoner's ox, pay 30 shekels of silver. Harm a noble's ox, the fine tripled. This tiered system acknowledged social hierarchies but crucially insisted even elites faced consequences. A surgeon operating on a noble risked losing his hands for negligence. A merchant caught watering down beer was drowned in his own vat. Brutal by modern standards, yet revolutionary in its consistency. For the first time, outcomes weren't left to chance or connections, they were predictable. Trade flourished under this certainty. Contracts etched in clay specified interest rates 20% for silver loans, 33% for grain, warranty periods for slaves, guaranteed not to run away for 1 month, even quality controls for tavern keepers. One law mandated that brewers selling bad beer repay their customers in grain, an ancient version of a money-back guarantee. These weren't arbitrary rules, they solved real problems in a society where commerce stretched from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia. But Hammurabi's genius lay in how he wielded these laws as political tools. When conquering city-states like Larsa, he didn't just impose his code, he adapted it, incorporating local customs to ease transitions. Surviving letters show him personally adjudicating disputes, once ordering a corrupt official to repay extorted silver, down to the last barleycorn. The message was clear: the king's justice reached every corner of the realm. Yet the code's true legacy isn't in its specific penalties, it's in the radical idea it enshrined. For the first time, rulers weren't just above the law, they were bound by it. Hammurabi's epilogue boasts that future kings must preserve his statutes, warning that any who altered them would be cursed by the gods. This notion that power derives from upholding rules, not ignoring them, echoes in constitutions worldwide today. Religion wasn't separate from this legal revolution, it fueled it. Mesopotamians believed their cities existed by divine mandate, with temples as literal houses of the gods. When Hammurabi claimed Shamash authorized his laws, he tapped into a profound cultural truth. Justice wasn't human whim, it was cosmic order. Priests served as judges, oaths were sworn on altars, and contracts invoked deities as witnesses. Even mundane transactions, like selling a donkey, ended with phrases like, "Sworn by Ishtar, may she strike the lyre." This spiritual framework shaped daily life down to the smallest details. Farmers paid temple taxes in barley for New Year festivals, honoring the gods' renewal of creation. Business contracts included clauses like, "Unless the river flood washes it away," an act attributed to the moody god Enki. Medicine blended prayer and practicality. A headache cure might mix crushed herbs with incantations to the healing goddess Gula. What emerges is a civilization where law, commerce, and faith weren't separate spheres but threads of the same fabric. The same scribes who recorded court verdicts also copied hymns to Enlil, god of storms. The same merchants who haggled over copper prices funded temple renovations to ensure divine favor. In this world, Hammurabi's steel wasn't an anomaly. It was the natural product of a society striving to mirror heavenly order on earth. As we'll see next, this intertwining of sacred and secular reached its zenith in Mesopotamia's towering ziggurates, not just temples, but the beating hearts of cities where gods walked among mortals. Rising above the flat Mesopotamian plains, the ziggurates weren't just architectural marvels, they were bridges between earth and heaven. Take the great Ziggurate of Ur, its terraced levels painted vivid colors, each tier representing a step closer to the divine. At the summit, priests performed rituals believed to sustain the cosmos itself. But these towering temples were far more than sacred spaces. They were the nerve centers of cities where priests tracked grain shipments, scribes recorded court verdicts, and administrators distributed rations to workers, all under the watchful eyes of the gods. This fusion of spiritual and earthly power shaped every aspect of life. Kings didn't just rule by force, they served as intermediaries between gods and people. When a new ruler took the throne, priests anointed him in ceremonies invoking Enlil, the storm god who granted kingship. Even conquests were framed as divine missions. Sargon of Akkad claimed the warrior goddess Ishtar marched beside his armies. But with divine favor came crushing responsibility. If crops failed or enemies invaded, it wasn't just bad luck, it meant the gods were displeased. A letter to King Zimri Lim of Mari warned bluntly, "No king is powerful on his own, only when the gods walk before him does he succeed." The tension between mortal rulers and immortal patrons sparked some of history's first political dramas. When the city of Nippur rebelled against King Rim-Sin, priests declared the god Enlil had withdrawn his blessing, a celestial vote of no confidence. Worse were the moments when gods seemed to turn capricious. The Curse of Akkad, a poetic lament, describes the once glorious capital crumbling after its king angered Enlil. The great fields produced no grain, the flooded rivers bore no fish. For Mesopotamians, this wasn't mythology, it was a cautionary tale about the fragile bond between heaven and earth. Yet this divine human partnership also inspired astonishing resilience. When floods or invasions struck, cities rebuilt their temples first, believing restoration rituals would mend cosmic order. The Epic of Gilgamesh captures this ethos perfectly. Its heroes battle monsters and seek immortality, but the story's heart lies in a simple truth: humans flourish when they honor the god's laws. Even Hammurabi, that shrewd legal mind, knew his code would fail without divine backing. His steel's top panel doesn't show him dictating laws, it shows him humbly receiving them from Shamash, the sun god of justice. The genius of this system lay in its flexibility. Unlike later civilizations with rigid pantheons, Mesopotamians adapted their gods to new challenges. When Babylon rose to power, its patron Marduk didn't replace older deities, he absorbed their traits, becoming a cosmic diplomat who unified the divine assembly. This wasn't just theological evolution, it was political savvy, mirroring Babylon's knack for blending conquered cultures into its empire. But beneath the grandeur of Ziggurates and royal decrees simmered very human questions. How could a just God allow innocent suffering? Why did some cities thrive while others fell? These dilemmas birthed literature's first existential debates. In the poem of the Righteous Sufferer, a pious man named Shubshi-Messer Shaken wails at the injustice of his misfortunes. "I prayed to my God, but he turned his back." The startling answer: gods operate beyond mortal understanding, a theme that would echo through Job's lament and Greek tragedies millennia later. What emerges is a civilization wrestling with ideas we still grapple with today: the limits of power, the search for meaning in chaos, and the eternal dance between human ambition and forces beyond our control. Those priests climbing the Ziggurat steps weren't just performing rituals. They were trying to decipher the universe's blueprint, one prayer, one law, one harvest season at a time. More than 4,000 years ago, a scribe pressed his stylus into wet clay, preserving a story that would outlive empires. The Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't just Mesopotamia's greatest literary treasure, it was a mirror held up to the human condition. At its heart lies a king's desperate quest to conquer death, only to learn that immortality lies not in endless life, but in the legacy one leaves behind. When Gilgamesh weeps over his fallen friend Enkidu, his grief resonates as powerfully today as it did in ancient Ur. But this wasn't merely poetry, it was cultural DNA, encoding values that held city-states together across generations. Consider the famous flood narrative where the gods send waters to wipe out humanity, all except one righteous man, Utnapishtim, who builds an ark to save his family and animals. Sound familiar? Centuries before the Hebrew Bible's Noah, Mesopotamians were grappling with profound questions. Why do disasters strike? Can mortals earn divine mercy? The story wasn't just myth, it was an explanation for the Tigris's unpredictable floods, transforming terrifying natural events into tales with moral lessons. When the river burst its banks, priests didn't recite engineering manuals, they retold Utnapishtim's survival as proof that piety could avert catastrophe. Yet Gilgamesh's epic did more than explain disasters, it shaped behavior. The hero's early arrogance, crushing grief, and ultimate humility modeled societal ideals. Young scribes copying the text absorbed its messages. that even kings must respect the gods' boundaries, that friendship tempers raw power, that human achievements crumble before nature's forces. These weren't abstract ideas, they directly influenced how Mesopotamians governed. A king who neglected temple offerings risked becoming another cautionary tale, like the proud ruler Aga, whose defiance of the gods doomed his city. The epic's endurance reveals its genius. Fragments have been found across the ancient Near East, from Assyrian royal libraries to Hittite outposts, proof that this story traveled like cultural currency. Later civilizations adapted its themes, the Greeks' Odysseus wrestling with mortality, the Hebrews' Job questioning divine justice. Even modern superhero narratives echo Gilgamesh's blend of strength and vulnerability. That a tale pressed into clay millennia ago still speaks to us today is testament to Mesopotamia's profound understanding of storytelling's power, not just to entertain, but to bind societies together with shared meaning. But stories alone couldn't hold back the floods or raise temple walls. Mesopotamians paired their philosophical depth with breathtaking engineering prowess, like the massive levees that tamed the Euphrates, or the ingenious bitumen waterproofing that kept reservoirs from leaking. When they envisioned the gods dwelling atop Ziggurates, they didn't just build stairs to heaven, they calculated load-bearing brickwork and precise drainage angles. The same culture that pondered mortality through poetry also invented the arch, the ramp, and standardized bricks, because in Mesopotamia, the spiritual and the practical were never truly separate. One particularly clever innovation emerged from temple breweries. Fermentation vats required precise temperature control, so priests designed double-walled containers with insulating air gaps, an early example of thermal engineering. Their beer wasn't just for celebration, it was a nutritional staple, with workers often paid in daily rations of thick, barley-based brew. Even here, myth and technology intertwined. The goddess Ninkasi wasn't just a deity of intoxication. Her hymn was essentially a beer recipe, ensuring the sacred art of brewing was passed down verbatim through generations. What becomes clear is that Mesopotamia's greatness sprang from blending imagination with ingenuity. The same scribes who copied Gilgamesh's adventures also calculated seed-to-yield ratios for barley fields. The architects who raised ziggurates to the stars also engineered city-wide sewage systems. This duality, the ability to wrestle with life's biggest questions while solving its most practical problems, may be their most enduring legacy. Because whether facing floods or existential dread, they understood that civilization requires both stories to give meaning and tools to shape reality. And so we turn to those tangible marvels, the canals that turned deserts green, the towering walls that defied invaders, the lunar calendars so precise they're still the basis for our months today. Each innovation carried the imprint of a world where nothing was merely functional, where every brick, every canal, every law bore the weight of divine purpose. The Mesopotamians didn't just build infrastructure, they wove cosmic order into the fabric of daily life. The Tigris and Euphrates were life-giving rivers until they weren't. Each spring, melting snows from distant mountains sent floodwaters raging across Mesopotamia with terrifying force, washing away crops, homes, and entire villages. Yet within generations, these same people who trembled before nature's wrath began bending the rivers to their will. With nothing but copper tools and mud brick baskets, they engineered canals so precise they'd put modern irrigation systems to shame. Some channels ran straight as arrows for miles, while others branched like delicate veins across the landscape, turning parched soil into lush fields of barley and dates. The secret: mathematics. Mesopotamians didn't just count, they calculated. Their base 60 system, born from counting finger joints rather than whole fingers, allowed astonishing precision. Need to divide a field equally among heirs, their tablets show step-by-step algebraic solutions. Planning a canal slope, they calculated gradients down to fractions. This numerical genius didn't just shape farmland, it structured time itself. That's why we still measure hours in 60 minutes and circles in 360 degrees, echoes of Sumerian scribes scratching numbers in clay. But moving water was only half the battle. Feeding growing cities required monumental labor, and here Mesopotamia outdid itself. Take the great Ziggurat of Ur. Its massive core required millions of baked bricks, each hauled up ramps by workers consuming 4,000 daily calories, more than a modern athlete. How did officials track such staggering logistics? Scribe schools trained administrators to calculate exact brick counts, worker shifts, and even beer rations needed per laborer. One tablet from Gersu details a workforce of 7,000, their pay in barley meticulously recorded. This wasn't just accounting, it was the birth of large-scale project management. Yet these feats paled before their most audacious idea, that humans could transform entire ecosystems. When silt-clogged canals, they didn't just dredge, they redesigned. Faced with salty soil from over-irrigation, they rotated barley with salt-tolerant crops like sesame. Some cities even built artificial wetlands to filter water naturally. The result, fields that produced surplus harvests for millennia, feeding populations denser than many modern regions. Their economic system mirrored this ingenuity. Temples didn't just store grain, they functioned as proto-banks, issuing loans with interest rates fixed by law. Merchants used standardized weights based on the shekel, equivalent to 180 barleycorns, to trade textiles for Lebanese cedar or Afghan lapis lazuli. Contracts guaranteed product quality, like one insisting copper ingots be red as fire, not blackened. Even labor was commodified. Skilled weavers earned twice as much as field hands, creating history's first recognizable wage scales. What emerges is a civilization that saw no divide between the practical and the profound. The same priests who charted Jupiter's path also calculated seed distribution rates. The same engineers who raised ziggurates toward the gods also ensured their foundations wouldn't sink into marshland. In Mesopotamia, every canal dug and every brick laid was both an earthly necessity and a cosmic act, a belief that human hands could mirror divine order. And as we'll see next, this mindset didn't just build cities. It shaped an economic network stretching from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean, laying the groundwork for globalization itself. Picture this: a farmer in ancient Ur walks into a temple storeroom not to pray, but to withdraw 20 sacks of barley, not for eating, but as payment for a field he's just purchased. This was Mesopotamia's groundbreaking answer to a problem we still grapple with today: how to create an economy when coins and paper money don't exist. Their solution was so elegant it still underpins modern finance. Grain wasn't just food, it was currency with standardized measures ensuring fairness. 1 shekel's worth, exactly 180 barleycorns, a unit so reliable it became the basis for weighing silver centuries later. Temples transformed into history's first financial institutions. When floodwaters delayed planting, priests didn't just offer prayers, they extended loans. Records from the city of Lhasa show temples issuing seed loans at a standard interest rate of 33% to be repaid after harvest. Defaulters faced consequences straight out of a modern credit report, banned from future loans until debts were settled. These weren't predatory practices but carefully calculated risks. The interest-covered grain lost to pests, rot, or the occasional dishonest farmer. What made this system revolutionary was its documentation. Contracts etched in clay tablets specified every detail: the loan amount, due date, even penalty clauses for late payment. One contract from Sippar includes an ancient version of collateral. The borrower pledged his orchard as security. To prevent fraud, parties rolled cylinder seals across the wet clay, creating unique signatures. These intricate stone seals, often depicting gods or kings, were more than decorative. They were cryptographic security devices, impossible to forge without the original. But the real magic lay in how these innovations built trust across vast distances. A merchant in Assyria could ship tin to Dilmun, modern Bahrain, knowing the recipient's seal on the contract guaranteed payment. Standardized weights and measures certified by royal inspectors meant no haggling over whether a sack meant 50 or 60 liters. This reliability fueled trade networks stretching from the Indus Valley to Crete, with Mesopotamian textiles exchanged for Afghan lapis lazuli and Anatolian silver. Yet beneath this economic sophistication ran deep inequalities. While elite merchants dined on imported wine served by slaves, laborers earned subsistence rations, 2 liters of barley per day for a construction worker at Ur's Ziggurat. Temple archives reveal stark hierarchies. Skilled metalworkers received double the rations of field hands, while master scribes enjoyed perks like land grants. Women could own property and run businesses. A jar seal from Ur identifies the brewer Cubotum as a woman, but royal decrees still dictated that a widow's inheritance passed to her sons. The most revealing artifacts, debt relief edicts. When mounting loans threatened social stability, kings like Amasajuka periodically wiped the slate clean, annulling barley debts to prevent economic collapse. These weren't acts of charity, they were calculated resets to maintain a system where wealth concentrated at the top, yet depended on the productivity of the bottom. Sound familiar? Mesopotamia's economic genius wasn't just in inventing loans and contracts, but in recognizing that civilization requires balancing self-interest with collective survival, a lesson etched in clay millennia before Wall Street existed. Peering through the doorway of a typical Mesopotamian home, we find a world where social hierarchies weren't abstract concepts, they shaped every meal, marriage, and daily ritual. The house itself tells the story, a modest mud brick structure with rooms arrayed around a central courtyard, where a family of textile workers might share space with a handful of enslaved laborers. But don't mistake this for simple oppression. The enslaved weaver at the loom could be working off a debt, her freedom contractually guaranteed after 3 years of service. Meanwhile, the merchant's wife bartering in the marketplace might reinvest her profits into a date palm orchard registered solely in her name. Mesopotamian society was rigid, yet full of surprising fluidity. At the pinnacle stood kings like Shulgi of Ur, who didn't just rule, they performed. This monarch boasted of running 19 kilometers in a single day to inaugurate a religious festival, then composing hymns about his athletic feat. But such displays weren't mere vanity. By embodying both warrior and scholar, kings reinforced their divine right to govern. When they commissioned statues depicting them carrying baskets of temple-building clay, it wasn't propaganda, it was theater, proving they served the gods just like the lowest laborer. Priests occupied a similarly exalted tier, but their power came with perilous responsibility. Temple officials diagnosed omens in sacrificed sheep's livers, interpreting dark spots as warnings from the gods. A single misread omen could see them demoted to field labor, an early example of performance-based employment, yet their knowledge granted unique privileges. Medical priests prescribed remedies mixing honey and thyme for coughs, while astronomer priests tracked Venus's movements to predict harvest fortunes. The bustling middle class included artisans whose guild-like organizations set quality standards. A lapidary inlaid temple doors with precious stones under contracts stipulating exact wages 30 liters of barley per day, while metal workers faced fines for selling substandard copper ingots. Merchants navigated even more complex terrain. One Assyrian trader's letters reveal frantic negotiations. The caravan from Kanesh is delayed. Sell the tin at any price before the market floods. Their success hinged on literacy, with many training as scribes to draft their own contracts. For women, legal rights existed alongside cultural constraints. Dowry tablets show daughters inheriting equal shares to sons, and divorce decrees like one from Nippur specify that a wife could leave if her husband failed to provide food, oil, and clothing. Yet women's public roles dwindled over centuries, with later laws barring them from tavern ownership unless they were priestesses. These temple elites wielded extraordinary influence, managing vast estates and even adjudicating legal disputes. At the pyramid's base, enslaved people lived paradoxes. War captives toiled indefinitely, but debt slaves had contracts carved in clay. After 5 harvests, the servant Gimil Ishtar shall go free. Some even rose to manage their master's warehouses, earning modest shares of profits. Their existence wasn't questioned. Texts described social orders as fixed by celestial design, with the Enuma Elish creation myth depicting lesser gods laboring until revolting, prompting the creation of humans to bear the workload. Ordinary families navigated this system through shrewd pragmatism. A father might apprentice his son to a scribble school, gambling on upward mobility, while mothers taught daughters to weave textiles, being a rare industry where women consistently profited. Household shrines held figurines of protective spirits, offering psychological refuge from societal pressures. When floods or raids struck, whole neighborhoods pooled resources, as shown by tablets recording bread shared among 18 houses. This intricate web of roles and rules wasn't just about control. It was Mesopotamia's answer to an existential question: how to keep a fragile civilization functioning amid unpredictable rivers and rival city-states. The baker kneading dough for temple offerings, the child practicing cuneiform after chores, the king anxiously awaiting omens. All played assigned parts in a grand drama they believed kept the cosmos itself in balance. What we see as inequality, they saw as interdependence, each tier upholding the structure that allowed their world to endure. Step inside a Mesopotamian home around 2000 BC, and you'd find a space both alien and strangely familiar. The walls sun-dried mud brick thick enough to blunt the desert heat. The floor packed earth, swept clean but still gritty underfoot. At the center, an open courtyard let in sunlight and air, a design so practical it's still used in hot climates today. Here, families gathered not just to eat, but to live much of their lives. The smell of baking barley bread would have been constant, its dense loaves cooked in conical clay ovens that doubled as heaters on chilly nights. And if you listened closely, you might hear the rhythmic grinding of grain, a task so essential that skeletons from the period show women's arm bones thickened from years of working stone querns. Their meals were simple but surprisingly nutritious. Barley, the backbone of the diet, appeared as porridge, flatbreads, even fermented into beer so thick it was eaten with a spoon. Dates provided quick energy, while onions and garlic lent flavor to lentils and chickpeas. Meat was rare, reserved for festivals or the wealthy, but fish from the canals added protein. Remarkably, we know their exact portions from ration lists. A laborer at Ur's Ziggurate received 2 liters of barley, half a liter of beer, and occasionally a handful of dates per day. This wasn't just sustenance, it was currency, with beer often listed as partial payment for work. Children's toys reveal a world where play mirrored adult life. Archaeologists have found miniature chariots with functional wheels, suggesting kids reenacted battles or processions. Dolls with movable limbs and clay animals hint at imaginative games, while board games like the Game of 20 Squares, ancestor to backgammon, show even leisure had structure. But childhood ended early. By 12, most girls learned weaving from their mothers, boys their fathers' trades, though lucky few might attend scribble schools if their families could spare the labor. Festivals broke the daily grind with explosions of color and sound. During the New Year's Akitu festival, priests paraded statues of gods through streets strewn with flowers while musicians played lyres and drums. Ordinary people wore their best woolen garments, dyed vibrant blues and reds with precious indigo and madder. tables groaned under roasted meats and honey cakes normally unaffordable, a rare chance to feast like royalty. Yet these celebrations weren't just fun, they reinforced social bonds. When a community collectively repaired the local temple or reenacted creation myths, they weren't just honoring gods, they were reminding themselves why cooperation mattered. Poetry and music provided solace in quieter moments. A love poem from Lagash whispers across millennia, "Bridegroom, let me caress you, my precious caress is sweeter than honey." Musicians plucked harps adorned with bull heads, their songs likely blending sacred hymns with popular tunes. But this rich cultural life existed against a backdrop of constant peril. A single failed flood or locust swarm could wipe out a year's food. Worse were the wars city-states clashed over water rights and trade routes, with victors often enslaving entire populations. Letters from Mari describe parents hiding children ahead of raids, while treaties carved on stone stelae attest to fleeting attempts at peace. The duality of Mesopotamian life emerges clearly here. They baked bread knowing famine lurked just one bad harvest away. They composed sublime poetry while maintaining meticulous records of battle casualties. Their joy in festivals and family was hard-won, a conscious defiance of the instability surrounding them. Perhaps that's why their beer recipes specified precise fermentation times, or why their contracts included clauses for droughts and invasions, not out of pessimism, but because acknowledging life's fragility made their moments of warmth and creativity all the more precious. War wasn't just a threat in Mesopotamia, it was a constant. City-states like Ur and Lagash clashed over control of precious canals, their armies clashing in what became history's first documented battles. The stele of the vultures, carved around 2500 BC, shows King Enotum of Lagash leading troops into combat, his enemies trampled beneath chariot wheels. But behind these royal boasts lay a grimmer reality. Letters from Mari describe mothers hiding children as siege towers neared city walls, while administrative tablets list rations for refugees streaming in from sacked villages. Famine stalked every conflict, one text from Umma records workers too weak to harvest barley, their stomachs swollen from hunger. Yet Mesopotamia's greatest adversaries weren't rival kings but the rivers themselves. The Tigris and Euphrates could transform from life-givers to killers within days. When the floodwaters surged too high, they drowned fields and smashed mud-brick homes. When they ran low, crops withered under the blistering sun. A lament from the city of Nippur wails. The rivers rose, but no flood came. The fields lie barren like a widow's heart. Faced with such chaos, Mesopotamians didn't just pray. They engineered solutions, their secret weapon, the plow. Not the simple digging sticks used elsewhere, but a revolutionary cedar plow pulled by oxen. This ingenious device cut furrows and dropped barley seeds simultaneously, tripling harvests. Surviving manuals detail its operation. Yoke the oxen tightly, lest they veer 3 fingers deep no more. But their innovations didn't stop at farming. When salinization threatened soil after centuries of irrigation, they pioneered crop rotation, alternating barley with salt-tolerant dates. They built underground clay pipes to drain marshes, creating new farmland where reeds once choked the waterways. Even their calendars became tools of survival. By tracking the moon's phases, priests predicted flood seasons, giving farmers precious weeks to prepare. One almanac from Babylon advises, when the moon wears a halo in Nisan, store extra grain, the river will roar. The unpredictability of their world sparked another breakthrough: insurance. Temples maintained emergency grain reserves, while merchants formed risk-sharing partnerships. A contract from Ashur shows 2 traders splitting profits 60-40, with clauses covering losses from bandits or shipwrecks. This wasn't just commerce, it was collective survival. Perhaps the most telling response to chaos, though, lay in their storytelling. Myths like the Epic of Atrahasis explain disasters as divine warnings, framing suffering as part of a larger cosmic order. When reality offered no guarantees, their narratives provided meaning, a reminder that even amid floods and wars, humanity could endure, and endure they did, planting seeds of knowledge that would outlast empires. From the plow's furrows to the scribe's tablet, Mesopotamia's greatest invention wasn't any single tool, but the unshakable belief that human ingenuity could tame chaos itself. Now consider their scientific mind. While survival drove many innovations, curiosity fueled others, like their celestial observations that laid the groundwork for astronomy. The same priests who tracked floods also charted Venus's cycles, their star maps so precise they predicted eclipses centuries in advance. The night skies over Mesopotamia weren't just a canvas of stars, they were a divine blueprint scrawled with messages the priests vowed to decipher. Perched atop Ziggurates, these scholar clerics tracked Venus's movements with such precision they could predict its reappearance after months of invisibility. One tablet from Nineveh records the planet's cycle down to the hour, a feat of observation so accurate it wouldn't be matched for 1,500 years. But this wasn't idle stargazing. When the constellation Leo rose heliacally in summer, it signaled the approaching flood season, sending farmers scrambling to reinforce canal banks. The priests didn't just study the heavens, they weaponized celestial patterns into survival tools. Their medical practices walked a similar line between logic and mysticism. A prescription from Ashurbanipal's library directs, crush poppy seeds in beer for pain relief. Sound advice we now know leverages opium's analgesic properties. Yet the same text insists wound dressings must be applied while reciting incantations to Gula, goddess of healing. What seems like superstition was actually early empiricism. They observed honey's antibacterial effects on injuries, even if they credited divine intervention for the cure. Surgical texts describe draining pus from abscesses with bronze lancets, but only after consulting lunar omens to select auspicious days. This duality extended to their mathematics. While using base 60 calculations to design irrigation canals with perfect gradients, they also assigned mystical meanings to numbers. The digit 7 represented divine completeness, hence 7-day weeks and 7-tiered ziggurates. Even their maps blended precision with cosmology. A world map from Sippar shows Babylon at the center of concentric rings representing ocean, mountains, and the Bitter River, marking Earth's edge equal parts geographical survey and theological statement. Knowledge wasn't democratized, it was hoarded like temple treasure. Scribes spent decades mastering thousands of cuneiform signs, their training locked behind familial or priestly connections. A school tablet from Nippur lists the generations of a single scribble family stretching back 2 centuries, an intellectual dynasty guarding its expertise. Medical texts carried warnings like, "Let not the uninitiated see this tablet," while astronomical omens were state secrets consulted only by kings. This gatekeeping had strategic value. When Hittite envoys begged Babylonian astronomers for celestial insights, they were given vague predictions, while the precise calculations remained in palace archives. Yet for all its exclusivity, this system birthed something revolutionary, the very idea that nature operated by discernible rules. When priests recorded eclipse cycles across centuries, they weren't just serving superstition, they were uncovering patterns that implied cosmic order. Their blend of observation and tradition, though uneven by modern standards, planted seeds that would eventually grow into astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. The moment a healer chose willow bark, later understood to contain aspirin's precursor over random herbs because tablets noted its consistent results, Mesopotamia's greatest legacy emerged, the slow, messy birth of the scientific method itself. Now imagine a 12-year-old boy in the Adaba, his fingers cramped from hours copying multiplication tables. His teacher barks corrections: a misplaced wedge could turn 20 jars of oil into 20 enemy soldiers, with disastrous consequences for temple accounts. This grueling apprenticeship reserved for elites reveals the paradox of Mesopotamian learning. It meticulously preserved knowledge while restricting access to the very minds that might have revolutionized it. As we'll see next, this tension between tradition and innovation would define their civilization's trajectory and ultimately its limitations. The Adaba, or tablet house, wasn't just a school, it was a fortress of knowledge. Its gates open only to the sons of elites, merchants, and occasionally priests. Imagine a classroom where 10-year-olds spent 12-hour days hunched over clay tablets, their fingers cramping as they painstakingly copied lists of trees, animals, and gods. Discipline was brutal. One surviving student's tablet reads, "The supervisor beat me for talking, the scribe in charge beat me for poor handwriting, even the gatekeeper beat me for leaving early." Mistakes weren't just corrected, they were punished with rods or humiliating dunce caps made of recycled clay. Yet those who endured this gauntlet emerged as Mesopotamia's power brokers, the only citizens who could read contracts, tally taxes, or interpret royal decrees. This exclusivity wasn't accidental. Scribble families guarded their trade like state secrets, passing down techniques through generations. A graduate's first job might involve something as mundane as recording grain shipments, but his real value lay in mastering the system's loopholes. Temple inventories from Ur show scribes creatively classifying goods, labeling luxury items as ritual offerings to avoid audits, or inflating harvest totals to please kings. Their monopoly on literacy made them indispensable, yet also vulnerable. When King Rim Sin suspected scribes of skimming temple funds, he didn't just replace them, he ordered all administrative tablets rewritten in a new script style to flush out conspirators. The curriculum itself reveals what society prized most. Early lessons focused on practical vocabulary, lists of fish, metals, and measurements, but advanced students memorized literary classics like the Exaltation of Inanna, where the goddess boasts of overturning social order. "I turn slaves into nobles, I make the powerful kneel." Ironic, given that scribes were the enforcers of hierarchy. Even their math problems reinforced the status quo: exercises calculating interest rates for silver loans, or dividing inheritance among sons while giving daughters smaller dowries. Yet cracks occasionally appeared in this carefully controlled system. The myth of Enheduanna, history's first named author, hints at subversion. Daughter of Sargon of Akkad, she served as high priestess but penned hymns challenging male-dominated theology, portraying Inanna as a force of chaos who demolishes mountains with her wrath. Was this literary rebellion or state propaganda? Scholars still debate, but her work survived in scribble schools, proof that even gatekeepers couldn't suppress all dissent. The greatest threat to scribble authority, though, came from within. As empires expanded, the demand for bureaucrats outpaced elite supply. Schools began admitting outsiders, wealthy merchant sons who paid hefty tuition in silver. These new graduates cared less about preserving traditions than turning profits, drafting contracts with loopholes favoring their patrons. A tablet from Lhasa exposes a scribe bribed to backdate a land sale, his forged seal discovered when the original owner protested. The system designed to maintain order was now undermining it, one compromised clay tablet at a time. What emerges is a paradox. Mesopotamia's scribes built civilization's first knowledge economy, yet their grip on literacy became its Achilles heel. By hoarding education, they ensured cultural continuity across millennia, but also created a society where innovation required sneaking past the gatekeepers. When the next great leap in human communication arrived, the alphabet, it wouldn't emerge from their hallowed adabas, but from the margins of society where outsiders craved a system they couldn't access. The very institution that preserved Mesopotamia's legacy ultimately made it brittle. unable to adapt when the world moved beyond Cuneiform's wedge-shaped shackles. Inanna wasn't your typical goddess. She didn't just bend the rules, she shattered them. When this deity of love and war decided to descend into the underworld, her story wasn't just a myth, it was a cosmic rebellion. Against all odds, she marched through the 7 gates of the underworld, stripped of her divine regalia at each step until she stood naked before the Queen of the Dead. Yet Inanna didn't stay defeated. Through cunning and sheer will, she clawed her way back to the land of the living, reclaiming her power in a world that expected her to kneel. This wasn't just a tale of divine drama, it was Mesopotamia's subconscious wrestling with its own contradictions. A society built on rigid laws and hierarchies secretly idolized the chaos that threatened to upend it. Real-world echoes of Inanna's defiance flickered through everyday life. Take the merchant who smuggled copper ingots under layers of wool to dodge temple taxes, or the widow who petitioned the city governor when her brother-in-law seized her inheritance. These weren't grand revolutionaries, but their small acts of resistance revealed the cracks in Mesopotamia's carefully constructed order. Even kings felt the tension. When Sargon of Akkad's daughter, Enheduanna, wrote hymns elevating Inanna above male gods, she wasn't just composing poetry, she was subtly challenging the divine patriarchy that mirrored her own society's power structures. The most striking rebellions often happened under the radar. Scribble schools taught strict conformity, yet copies of the Cursing of Akkad, a text blaming a king's arrogance for his empire's collapse, circulated for centuries, a quiet warning against unchecked power. Trade contracts included hidden clauses, like one from Ashur where a merchant coded overcharging as gifts to the moon god. Law codes preached equality, but court records show nobles often bought lighter sentences. This dance between rebellion and control wasn't failure. It was the system working as intended. By allowing controlled outlets for dissent, Mesopotamia avoided explosive revolts while slowly evolving. Now shift your gaze beyond the Tigris and Euphrates. The same cuneiform tablets recording grain taxes also documented exchanges with the Indus Valley, where Mesopotamian lapis lazuli appeared in Mohenjo-Daro's markets. Hammurabi's laws influenced Hittite legal codes, while Babylonian math reached Greece via Phoenician traders. Like Inanna returning from the underworld, Mesopotamia's ideas couldn't be contained. They seeped into every corner of the ancient world, carried by merchants, diplomats, and sometimes even conquerors. The irony, a civilization obsessed with order became the chaos that reshaped the globe. The docks of Ur buzzed with languages from across the known world. Anatolian merchants haggling over ingots of silver, Lebanese shipwrights unloading fragrant cedar logs, Afghan traders unrolling bolts of cloth to reveal veins of glittering lapis lazuli. This wasn't just commerce, it was Mesopotamia's lifeblood. A single shipment from the Indus Valley could contain carnelian beads, ivory combs, and exotic woods, each item passing through a dozen hands along routes stretching thousands of miles. What's astonishing isn't the distance these goods traveled, but what traveled with them. Hidden in the hold of every ship, tucked between sacks of spices and ingots of tin, were ideas. Take the humble donkey caravan. These slow-moving trains of pack animals did more than carry tin from Ashur to Kanesh. They transported entire systems of thought. A merchant's clay tablet detailing interest rates might inspire a Hittite scribe to adapt cuneiform for his own language. A Babylonian weight standard based on the shekel's precise measure of barley could become the template for markets in far-off Troy. Even myths migrated along these routes. The Mesopotamian flood story, etched onto tablets in Akkadian, found its way into Hittite and Hurrian texts, eventually shaping narratives as distant as the Hebrew Bible's tale of Noah. The real game-changer was Mesopotamia's export of literacy itself. When Egyptian envoys saw cuneiform tablets in biblos, they didn't just copy the idea of writing. They reinvented it, transforming wedge-shaped marks into the elegant hieroglyphs we know today. This cultural cross-pollination went both ways. A single shipment of Lebanese cedar might arrive with Phoenician glassmaking techniques, which Mesopotamian artisans then blended with their own lapidary skills to create dazzling mosaics for ziggurates. Yet trade routes weren't just arteries of progress, they were also vectors of vulnerability. That same interdependence that brought wealth could spell disaster when empires clashed. A drought in Anatolia might slash silver production, triggering inflation in Babylonian markets. A revolt along the Persian Gulf could cut off supplies of precious lapis, leaving temple workshops idle. The fragility of this web became terrifyingly clear when the Akkadian Empire collapsed around 2200 BCE, its trade networks shattered by nomadic raids and climate shifts. Suddenly, the docks stood empty, prices for basic goods skyrocketed, and scribes lamented that the ships of Melu had no longer come. What emerges is a paradox. Mesopotamia's genius lay in building connections, but those very connections made its cities hostages to fortune. When the system worked, it created unprecedented prosperity. At its height, imported everything from Ethiopian ebony to Baltic amber. When it failed, the consequences were catastrophic. The lesson written into every clay tablet recording a broken contract or a delayed caravan was clear. Civilization doesn't just need laws and ziggurates, it needs roads, ships, and above all, trust between strangers separated by deserts and seas. Now picture the moment when that trust evaporated. A Babylonian merchant, having waited months for a promised shipment of tin, discovers his Anatolian partner claims the goods were lost to bandits. Without witnesses or written contracts, the system collapses into accusations and feuds. This wasn't just a business dispute, it was a microcosm of the tensions that would eventually unravel Mesopotamia's golden age, as rival empires began treating trade routes not as shared lifelines but as spoils of war. Sargon of Akkad didn't just conquer cities, he shattered the very idea of what a ruler could be. Before him, Mesopotamia was a patchwork of squabbling city-states, each with its own king and gods. Then this former cupbearer seized power around 2300 BCE, uniting the region under history's first true empire. His secret, a ruthless blend of military innovation and psychological warfare. Sargon's armies marched with standardized weapons, bronze-tipped spears and towering siege engines, but his real weapon was terror. After crushing rebellions, he dragged defeated kings through city gates in wooden neckstocks, forcing them to beg for mercy before executing them publicly. Yet he also built carefully, appointing loyal governors and installing his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess to merge Akkadian and Sumerian religions. This wasn't just brute force, it was the birth of imperial propaganda. Akkad's collapse a century later reads like a cautionary tale. Ancient scribes blamed divine wrath, claiming the gods sent the Gutians, barbarian invaders, to punish Sargon's arrogance. Modern archaeology tells a grimmer story. Tree rings reveal catastrophic droughts that starved cities, while tablets describe canals choked with salt from over-irrigation. The empire didn't just fall, it cannibalized itself. As crops failed, governors hoarded grain, mercenaries deserted, and desperate peasants smashed tax offices. The lesson: even history's mightiest empire couldn't outrun ecological reckoning. Centuries later, Babylon's Nebuchadnezzar Roman II faced the same paradox. His hanging gardens, whether real or mythical, symbolized imperial grandeur, tiered terraces bursting with exotic plants imported from conquered lands. His Ishtar Gate, glazed in lapis blue tiles and golden bulls, proclaimed Babylon's dominance to all who entered, yet behind these marvels lurked fragility. Nebuchadnezzar's own inscriptions betray anxiety. He rebuilt temples obsessively, fearing the gods might abandon him as they had his predecessors. His empire relied on deporting entire populations, like the Judeans exiled to Babylon, to break resistance and provide labor. This wasn't stability, it was a high-stakes gamble on perpetual control. The unraveling came swiftly. Within decades of Nebuchadnezzar's death, Persian armies under Cyrus the Great exploited unrest among overworked laborers and resentful subject peoples. Babylon's walls, once deemed impregnable, fell not to battering rams but to diverted rivers and opened gates. The pattern repeated endlessly. The Assyrians built an empire so vast it stretched from Egypt to Iran, only to collapse when overextension and rebellion snapped its spine. Each conqueror believed they'd cracked the code, yet all eventually faced the same truth. Mesopotamia's flat plains, lacking natural barriers, were as hard to defend as they were easy to dominate. What's astonishing isn't that these empires fell, but how their ideas outlived them. Sargon's bureaucratic templates resurfaced in Persian satrapies. Hammurabi's legal principles shaped Roman jurisprudence, even as Babylonian astronomers penned their final eclipse predictions before Seleucid rule extinguished Cuneiform. Their star charts were already being copied into Greek. The real legacy of Mesopotamia wasn't marble palaces or golden thrones. It was the intellectual infrastructure that made future civilizations possible. The rivers that birthed these empires eventually silted up. The Ziggurates crumbled to dust, but the concepts of written law, mathematical astronomy, and urban governance flowed outward like the Tigris in flood, irrigating the minds of every culture that followed. So why did the light fade here while shining elsewhere? Perhaps because Mesopotamia's greatest gift was its ability to transform invaders into inheritors. When the Achaemenids took Babylon, they didn't erase its traditions, they adopted them, blending Mesopotamian administration with Persian tolerance. Alexander the Great, dying in Nebuchadnezzar's palace, dreamed of restoring Babylon as his capital. The region's cyclical tragedies, conquest, revival, collapse became a workshop where the tools of civilization were endlessly refined, then passed onward. The cradle didn't vanish, it simply taught its children to walk. Persia's conquest of Babylon in 539 BC didn't erase Mesopotamia, it unleashed its ideas onto the world stage. Imagine Cyrus the Great standing in the shadow of the Ishtar Gate, not as a destroyer but as a student. His administrators pored over Babylonian legal tablets, adapting their meticulous record-keeping for the sprawling Persian Empire. Greek scholars later flocked to Mesopotamia's ruined libraries, where they discovered cuneiform tablets detailing astronomical cycles so precise they recalibrated Hellenic science. The Romans, masters of bureaucracy themselves, inherited Mesopotamia's obsession with written contracts, turning Hammurabi's stone-carved edicts into the backbone of imperial law. Even our modern world ticks to their rhythms, those 60-second minutes and 360-degree circles, direct descendants of Sumerian math, designed for tracking celestial movements, but now governing everything from microwave timers to GPS coordinates. So why did these innovations stick when Ziggurates crumbled and kingdoms faded? Because Mesopotamia tackled problems every society faces. How do you feed a city without daily hunts? Their irrigation networks became models from the Nile to the Yellow River. How do you settle disputes without violence? Hammurabi's Code inspired legal systems from Rome to Massachusetts. Even their failures taught lasting lessons. When salt buildup from over-farming poisoned their fields, it became a cautionary tale for agricultural societies across millennia. The real surprise isn't that their ideas spread, but how thoroughly they were absorbed until their origins faded into myth. Now let's peel back layers of misconception. Calling Mesopotamia the first civilization isn't quite right. Complex societies like Çatalhöyük predated it by millennia. What set Mesopotamia apart wasn't being first, but being systematic. While others built villages, they engineered cities with standardized bricks, sewer systems, and zoning laws. Their scribes didn't just record events, they created tax codes, dictionaries, even early encyclopedias. Unlike Egypt's isolated Nile Valley, Mesopotamia thrived on chaotic diversity. its constant invasions and trade wars forcing adaptations that made its culture uniquely exportable. The most persistent myth that this was a male-dominated world. Temple archives reveal powerful priestesses like Enheduanna composing poetry, female merchants like Iltoni running textile empires, and even a queen, Ku-Baba, ruling Kish around 2500 BC. Their legal tablets show women inheriting property, initiating divorces, and testifying in court rights that would vanish in later societies. Mesopotamia wasn't a utopia, but its complexity defies easy stereotypes. Perhaps the greatest testament to its legacy lies in what we've forgotten was theirs. That receipt you signed today, a direct descendant of Ur's clay contracts. The wheel on your car, refined from Sumerian chariot designs. Even the epic tales of Gilgamesh ghost through modern storytelling, from heroes' journeys to flood myths. The rivers that birthed this civilization have long since shifted course, but the intellectual currents they set in motion still carry us forward. Debunking the myth of Mesopotamia as the absolute first in everything doesn't diminish its achievement. It deepens our awe for how they transformed existing ideas into systems that shaped the world. Take Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, a sprawling complex of carved stone pillars dating back over 11,000 years, predating Mesopotamia by millennia. Its massive T-shaped monoliths prove humans were gathering in large groups and creating monumental architecture long before Cuneiform or Ziggurates. But here's the distinction. Göbekli Tepe's builders left no evidence of writing, urban planning, or legal codes. Mesopotamia didn't invent community or spirituality. It engineered them into the scaffolding of civilization. The same nuance applies to technology. Wheeled carts, Mesopotamians perfected them, but sleighs and rollers were moving heavy loads in Europe and the Arctic earlier. Irrigation, villages like Jordan's Ain Ghazal channeled water rudimentary centuries before Sumerian canals. What set Mesopotamia apart was scale and systematization. A lone farmer diverting a stream is clever. A city deploying thousands of workers to dig hundreds of miles of canals, with scribes tracking labor and rations down to the loaf of bread, is civilization. Their genius lay in taking sparks of innovation and fanning them into enduring flames. Even writing, often hailed as Mesopotamia's singular triumph, had precursors. Neolithic accountants in present-day Romania used clay tokens to track goods 5,000 years before Uruk scribes. But those tokens were just memory aids, a closed system understood only by their creators. Cuneiform, by contrast, broke abstraction's barrier. A tablet from Ur didn't just remind the writer of a debt. It told any literate person exactly who owed what, enforceable in court. This leap from private notation to public communication changed humanity's trajectory. Comparisons to other ancient powerhouses reveal more surprises. Egypt's pyramids awe us, but their society clung to hieroglyphs long after Mesopotamia's script streamlined into efficient administrative tools. The Indus Valley had planned cities with sewage systems rivaling Babylon's, yet left no deciphered legal codes. China's early dynasties mastered bronze work while Mesopotamia was innovating glassmaking. What emerges isn't a hierarchy of advanced cultures, but a web of specialization. The real lesson: civilization wasn't a single spark, but countless embers glowing across the ancient world. Mesopotamia's enduring legacy isn't that they did everything first, but that they wove disparate threads architecture from one region, accounting from another, into a fabric durable enough to clothe empires. Their ziggurates didn't rise from empty plains. They stood on foundations laid by forgotten experiments in human cooperation. And that makes their story not just impressive, but profoundly relatable. After all, progress has always been a chorus, not a solo. Even when one voice rings loudest across the centuries. Mesopotamia and Egypt both rose from river valleys, but their waters whispered very different truths. The Nile's predictable floods arrived like clockwork, its rich black silt replenishing fields with seasonal precision. This rhythm bred a culture of continuity. Pharaohs ruled as living gods, art styles stayed unchanged for centuries, and pyramids were built to defy time itself. Contrast that with the Tigris and Euphrates, where floods could arrive as violent surges or fail entirely, where salt buildup could turn fertile fields barren within generations. Here, survival demanded improvisation, kingship shifted between city-states, gods reflected chaos as much as order, and ziggurates weren't tombs but stairways where priests begged capricious deities for favor. These environmental pressures shaped their innovations. Egypt's hieroglyphs, elegant and ceremonial, adorned temple walls for eternity, but Mesopotamia's cuneiform. Born from urgent practicality, picture a Sumerian merchant staring at a warehouse stuffed with barley, wool, and copper ingots. No memory could track it all. The first marks were simple, a wedge for sheep, a circle for barley. Yet within centuries, those scratches evolved into a system so adaptable it could record poetry, lawsuits, even beer recipes. The difference was need. Egypt's stability allowed scribes to perfect hieroglyphs as sacred art. Mesopotamia's chaos demanded writing be fast, flexible, and above all, useful. Nowhere is this contrast clearer than in their sacred architecture. Egypt's pyramids sealed pharaohs away from the living world, their perfect geometry mirroring an unchanging cosmos. But climb a ziggurates ramps and you entered a bustling nerve center, priests tallying tax receipts, astronomers tracking Venus, merchants haggling below. Where pyramids whispered of eternity, ziggurates hummed with the urgency of now. Even their collapses tell a story. Egypt's monuments stand largely intact, while Mesopotamian cities were constantly rebuilt, layer upon layer, as floods and wars erased them. The real surprise isn't that writing emerged in Mesopotamia first, it's that it emerged here at all. Before cuneiform, humanity's records were fleeting, knotted cords, notched sticks, oral traditions. But in this land of unpredictable rivers and clashing city-states, forgetting wasn't an option. A loan agreement had to outlast harvest cycles. A treaty needed to bind kings who'd never meet. Writing became the glue holding a fragile system together. The irony, Egypt's stability may have delayed its need for complex notation. Why invent contracts when the Nile's bounty made disputes rare? Why codify laws when Pharaoh's word was divine? Mesopotamia's genius was turning desperation into innovation. Every time the rivers betrayed them, they engineered new solutions, not just in clay and brick, but in the very way they thought. Their writing, laws, and cities weren't monuments to perfection, but tools forged in the fire of chaos. And that, perhaps, is why their legacy endures. Pyramids awe us, but it's the humble clay tablet cracked, reused, often discarded that truly changed the world. The Tigris and Euphrates didn't just shape Mesopotamia's landscape, they forged its destiny. Unlike the predictable Nile with its gentle annual floods, these twin rivers were capricious allies. One year, they might surge unexpectedly, turning fields into lakes and sweeping away entire villages. The next, they could shrink to trickles, leaving cracked earth and starving crops. Survival here wasn't just about accepting nature's whims, it was about outthinking them. And that's precisely what sparked humanity's first great collaboration. Imagine the moment when early farmers realized that simply waiting for floods wouldn't suffice. Someone, perhaps a frustrated elder watching another failed harvest, proposed digging channels to guide water where it was needed. But one family's ditch wouldn't suffice. Taming these rivers required entire villages working in unison. Slowly, what began as small trenches evolved into vast irrigation networks, some stretching over 50 miles. This wasn't just farming, it was social engineering. For the first time, humans weren't just reacting to their environment, they were redesigning it through collective effort. The real breakthrough came when surplus harvests started piling up. For millennia, every hand had been needed just to secure enough food. Now, with irrigation producing more barley and dates than a single family could eat, society could finally specialize. One person might focus entirely on crafting bronze tools, another on weaving textiles, while yet another devoted themselves to studying the stars. This division of labor didn't just create new professions, it birthed entirely new ways of thinking. But cooperation on this scale demanded something unprecedented, memory beyond any single lifetime. Early tally marks on clay tokens tracked who contributed labor to maintain canals and who owed grain to temple storehouses. Over centuries, these simple scratches evolved into full-fledged writing not for poetry or kings, but for the mundane magic of accounting. A tablet from Uruk 4,000 years ago lists over 17,000 laborers and their daily beer rations. The message was clear: civilization runs on receipts. Now let's rewind history. Suppose the Tigris had been as docile as the Nile. Without the urgency of erratic floods, would Mesopotamians have ever developed those intricate canals? Without the need to coordinate thousands of workers, would writing have remained just decorative symbols? It's tempting to imagine an easier path, a Mesopotamia where bountiful harvests came effortlessly, where rivers behaved like obedient servants. Yet without those very challenges demanding ingenious solutions, humanity might have lingered in small villages for millennia longer. The harsh truth: comfort rarely drives innovation. Egypt's predictable Nile fostered magnificent pyramids, but not the relentless reinvention that characterized Mesopotamia. When your survival depends on outsmarting nature itself, you don't just build, you engineer, you organize, you invent systems that outlast seasons. Those early farmers battling unpredictable floods were unknowingly laying the groundwork for cities, laws, and even the concept of timekeeping. Their struggles became the crucible where civilization itself was forged, not in spite of the challenges, but because of them. What if another river valley had birthed civilization first? The Indus had meticulous city planning. The Yellow River nurtured early states, but neither produced Cuneiform's versatility or Hammurabi's legal codes. Perhaps Mesopotamia's true advantage wasn't just water and soil, but the perfect storm of difficulty and opportunity. Enough resources to dream big, but enough instability to demand constant innovation. The rivers didn't just sustain life, they kept it perpetually on the edge, where necessity didn't just mother invention, but midwifed an entire new way of being human. Imagine a world where writing stayed trapped inside human memory, where laws remained unwritten traditions passed down through generations, where cities never grew beyond small clusters of huts. Without Mesopotamia's breakthroughs, the scientific method might have remained a distant dream, shackled by the limits of oral tradition. Think of the painstaking process: centuries of observations about star cycles or medicinal plants, lost each time a village elder died, with no clay tablets to preserve that knowledge across generations. Justice systems, too, could have languished in ambiguity, where rulings depended on local customs or a strongman's whim, rather than codified principles like Hammurabi's eye for an eye. Even global trade would have lacked its earliest playbook: no standardized weights, no enforceable contracts, just risky barter between strangers with no shared rules. The absence of Mesopotamia would ripple through time like a skipped stone. The Indus Valley might still have built orderly cities, but without Cuneiform's example, their undeciphered script may never have evolved beyond basic symbols. Egypt's hieroglyphs could have remained purely ceremonial, never adapting for administrative use. Greece's philosophy might have lacked the foundational mathematics borrowed from Babylonian astronomers. Every civilization builds on what came before, and without Mesopotamia's shoulders to stand on, humanity's climb toward progress would have been steeper, slower, perhaps even impossible in the ways we recognize today. Yet for millennia, this cradle of civilization lay buried under desert sands, its cities reduced to strange mounds locals called tells. When European explorers first glimpsed the ruins of Nineveh in the 1800s, they mistook its towering walls for natural rock formations. The rediscovery began with a handful of clay fragments inscribed with wedge-shaped marks that defied translation, and a determined British diplomat named Henry Rawlinson. Perched on a ladder above Iran's Behistun Cliff in 1835, he painstakingly copied a trilingual inscription carved by Persian King Darius. Like the Rosetta Stone, this text held the same proclamation in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, offering a key to crack Cuneiform's code. What emerged from the dust was a civilization far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Early archaeologists expected primitive beginnings instead. They unearthed libraries like Ashurbanipal's in Nineveh, stocked with 30,000 tablets covering everything from astronomy to medical diagnosis. One tablet even contained a customer complaint, a merchant named Nani furious that his copper delivery was substandard and delayed. This wasn't just history, it was humanity caught mid-stride, preserved in clay. Modern technology continues to peel back layers. Satellite imagery reveals lost canals beneath Iraq's farmlands, while CT scans decode tablets too fragile to unwrap. Chemists analyze residues in 4,000-year-old beer jugs, and linguists use AI to reconstruct lost dialects from grammatical patterns. Each discovery tightens the thread connecting Mesopotamian innovations to our world, their base 60 math in our clock faces, their property deeds in our legal systems, their epic tales in our storytelling DNA. The real revelation isn't just how much they invented, but how thoroughly their solutions became invisible, woven into civilization's fabric until we forgot the weaver. That's the ultimate testament to Mesopotamia's genius. Their ideas were so foundational, we stopped seeing them as innovations and simply accepted them as how the world works. From the way we measure time to the laws that govern our societies, we are all, in some way, still living in their shadow. For centuries, the secrets of Mesopotamia lay buried beneath Iraq's windswept plains, its once great cities reduced to mysterious mounds locals called tells. Then, in 1846, a British army officer named Henry Rawlinson dangled from ropes on the face of Iran's Behistun Cliff, risking his life to copy strange symbols carved 500 feet above the ground. This towering trilingual inscription, commissioned by Persian King Darius around 500 BCE, held the key to unlocking a lost world. Like Egypt's Rosetta Stone, it repeated the same proclamation in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform. Rawlinson spent years painstakingly comparing the scripts, cracking the code one wedge-shaped symbol at a time. The moment of breakthrough came with a single name. Rawlinson recognized Darius repeated in the Old Persian section, allowing him to match it to the cuneiform characters below. Suddenly, messages scratched onto clay tablets 4,000 years ago began speaking again. Early translations revealed unexpected voices, like the merchant who complained his copper delivery was not the good quality promised, or the heartbroken poet who wrote, "You have poured love's honey over me." These weren't just historical records, they were snapshots of humanity frozen in time. Archaeologists soon realized cuneiform wasn't just for kings and laws. A tablet from Ur detailed a real estate deal where a widow sold her house to pay debts, complete with witness signatures. Another from Mari contained a doctor's prescription: crushed turtle shell and river pebbles mix with beer and drink for kidney pain. Even bureaucratic documents pulsed with life, like the ration list from a scribble school that included extra beer for the teacher, because grading tablets is thirsty work. But the true bombshell came when scholars pieced together the epic of Gilgamesh from scattered fragments. Here was a Mesopotamian Noah's flood story predating the Hebrew Bible by centuries, complete with divine warnings and a survivor building an ark. The discovery sent shockwaves through religious and academic circles, proving how deeply Mesopotamia's stories had seeped into global culture. Today, technology accelerates these revelations. CT scans unveil hidden layers inside unopened clay envelopes, while AI helps reconstruct broken tablets like cosmic jigsaw puzzles. Chemists analyzing residue on 4,000-year-old beer jugs recreated the recipe, a dense, porridge-like brew sipped through straws to avoid sediment. Even satellite imagery exposes long-buried canals and roads, rewriting maps of ancient trade routes. What makes these discoveries so thrilling isn't just filling gaps in history, it's watching our ancestors step off the pedestal of myth and become real. The scribe who doodled a chariot race on the edge of a tax record, the merchant who haggled over wool prices in letters peppered with gossip, they remind us that civilization's foundations weren't laid by abstract forces, but by people as flawed, clever, and vibrant as we are. And as we'll see next, their fingerprints are everywhere in our modern world, from the contracts we sign to the way we measure time itself. Echoes of Mesopotamia hum quietly beneath the rhythms of our daily lives, so familiar we've forgotten their origins. Those 7 days you casually jot into your planner, a direct inheritance from Babylonian sky watchers who divided the moon's cycle into 4 quarters. Though they'd be puzzled by our weekend, a concept their labor-heavy world never imagined. The contract you signed last month, its DNA traces back to clay tablets from Ur, where merchants etched penalty clauses for late deliveries in wedge-shaped script. Even the courtroom dramas binge-watched on lazy Sundays replay age-old themes. Hammurabi's Code established the notion that evidence, not brute force, should determine justice, a radical idea that still underpins legal systems from Tokyo to Toronto. Fantasy worlds like Game of Thrones unwittingly resurrect Mesopotamian archetypes. The brooding tyrant on his ziggurat-like throne, a dead ringer for Sargon of Akkad, who boasted of drowning rebellions in rivers of blood. The sprawling, stinking metropolis of King's Landing, a poetic license away from Babylon's labyrinthine alleys where traders haggled beneath the shadow of the Ishtar Gate. George R.R. Martin's Dothraki horsemen mirror the Gutian nomads who toppled Akkad, while Circe's Walk of Shame finds precedent in Mesopotamian texts describing adulterers paraded through city gates. These aren't lazy tropes, they're proof that humanity's oldest stories still resonate when draped in dragons and direwolves. Yet Mesopotamia's warnings glare just as brightly as its triumphs. Their environmental missteps read like a playbook for modern crises. Salinization, the slow poisoning of soil through over-irrigation, turned the Fertile Crescent's fields barren over centuries, a cautionary tale for today's aquifer-depleting megafarms. Tablets from Lagash lament how the earth turned white as salt, forcing farmers to abandon ancestral plots. Their solution, not conservation, but conquest, raiding neighboring regions for fresh farmland until overextension helped trigger collapse. Sound familiar? Replace spear-wielding armies with corporate land grabs, and the parallels to modern resource wars become unsettlingly clear. Their economic inequalities also carry eerie modern echoes. Temple archives from Ur detail a wealth gap that would make Silicon Valley blush. Elite scribes earned 20 times more than laborers, while debt slaves swelled to nearly a third of the population. Periodic clean slate decrees cancelling barley debts weren't acts of charity. They were desperate resets to prevent total societal breakdown, much like modern student loan forgiveness debates. Even their globalized economy mirrors ours. When trade routes from Anatolia to the Indus Valley faltered, inflation spiked just as today's supply chain snarls empty supermarket shelves. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in their fragile relationship with knowledge. Mesopotamia's scribes guarded literacy like a priestly secret, believing wisdom should flow only through approved channels. The result, when invaders burned libraries or droughts scattered scholars, entire disciplines like the advanced mathematics used to design canals vanished for centuries. Contrast that with Egypt, where hieroglyphs adorn temple walls for all to see if not read, ensuring cultural continuity even under foreign rule. In an age where algorithms control information feeds and digital archives can vanish with a server crash, their experience whispers a warning: hoarded knowledge is brittle knowledge. The real magic of Mesopotamia isn't that they got so much right, it's that they survived getting so much wrong. Their cities rose and fell like waves, each collapse leaving behind fragments for the next civilization to rebuild upon. That resilience, the ability to fail, adapt, and pass the torch may be their greatest gift to us. So next time you glance at a clock ticking through its base 60 seconds or flip through a fantasy novel thick with palace intrigue, remember, you're not just observing history. You're living its unbroken chain. The very rivers that gave Mesopotamia life also carried the seeds of its struggles. Over centuries, their ingenious irrigation systems, those same canals that turned deserts into breadbaskets, slowly poisoned the land with salt. Each time floodwaters evaporated under the blistering sun, they left behind faint white crusts of mineral residue. At first, the effect was barely noticeable, perhaps a slightly lower barley yield here, a stubborn patch of withered crops there. But as generations passed, the problem compounded. A tablet from Lagash around 2200 BC paints a desperate picture. The fields turned white as bones, our plows breaking on earth too salty even for weeds. Archaeologists analyzing soil cores have found the proof layers where once fertile sediment gives way to sterile salt deposits, coinciding with periods of mass abandonment. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a classic case of short-term success breeding long-term disaster. The same mathematical precision that allowed Mesopotamians to calculate optimal canal gradients failed to account for gradual ecological collapse. Their solution, not conservation but conquest, kings like Sargon of Akkad launched campaigns to seize fresh farmland from neighbors, while scribes rationalized the crises as divine punishment. Sound familiar? Modern parallels scream from the pages of their clay tablets from the Aral Sea's evaporation due to cotton farming to California's Central Valley battling rising soil salinity. Mesopotamia's environmental reckoning offers a chilling lesson. No civilization, no matter how advanced, is exempt from nature's accounting. Yet environmental stress alone didn't topple Ziggurates. It was the powder keg meeting the spark of social inequality. Temple archives from Ur reveal a wealth gap that would make modern billionaires blush. Elite scribes enjoyed villas with imported cedar beams, while laborers survived on barley rations barely sufficient for survival. Debt slavery ran rampant. One contract from Sippar shows a farmer pledging his children as collateral after 2 bad harvests. When rulers like Rim Sin of Lhasa cancelled debts to ease unrest, it was less about mercy than survival strategy, a Bronze Age precursor to today's debates over student loan forgiveness. The breaking point often came from within. Letters from Mari describe palace officials skimming grain stores during famines, while merchants hoarded goods to manipulate prices. By the time external invaders arrived, whether Gutians, Elamites, or Babylonians, many cities were already hollowed out by corruption and infighting. The pattern repeats eerily across history. From Rome's bread riots to the French Revolution, civilizations rarely collapse solely from outside forces. They rot first from inequality's slow burn. But here's the twist that makes Mesopotamia extraordinary: their ability to rise from the ashes. Unlike Egypt's relatively stable dynasties or the Indus Valley's mysterious disappearance, Mesopotamian cities embraced reinvention. When the Akkadian Empire crumbled under drought and rebellion, the survivors didn't vanish, they regrouped into new city-states. Babylon's rise after Ur's fall wasn't just a changing of the guard, it was a cultural metamorphosis, absorbing lessons from past failures. Their secret, adaptability baked into their worldview. Where Egyptian pharaohs proclaimed eternal order, Mesopotamian kings like Hammurabi boasted of restoring justice after chaos. They built resilience into their founding myths. Contemporary archaeologists see urgent wisdom in this cycle. Dr. Augusta McMahon of Cambridge University notes, Mesopotamians were the first to face problems we now recognize as global climate stress, resource competition, social fragmentation. Their solutions were imperfect, but their persistence holds clues for modern resilience. Similarly, economist David Graeber traced modern debt systems back to Mesopotamian temple loans, arguing that their periodic, clean slates prevented total societal collapse, a practice eerily absent from today's financial systems. What makes their story matter isn't just cautionary tales, it's their stubborn, creative refusal to surrender. When salinization ruined farms, they pivoted to salt-tolerant date palms. When dynasties fell, scribes preserved knowledge in libraries like Ashurbanipal's, ensuring ideas outlasted empires. Even their greatest failures became foundations for others. Persians and Greeks built upon Mesopotamian astronomy, law, and engineering rather than starting from scratch. So as we confront our own era of climate crises and social fractures, perhaps Mesopotamia's true legacy isn't just the mistakes to avoid, but the mindset to emulate, that pragmatic, stubborn insistence on rebuilding with whatever clay the rivers leave behind. Because in their story, we don't just see warnings, we see proof that collapse isn't an ending, but a brutal, necessary teacher. Archaeologists crouching in the dust of ancient Ur aren't just uncovering broken pottery, they're decoding a 5,000-year-old masterclass in urban survival. Dr. Zainab Barani of Columbia University points to the overcrowded neighborhoods of Uruk, where clay tablets record disputes over noise and property lines echoing modern city woes. They invented zoning laws when they realized haphazard construction blocked sewage channels, she explains, but their solutions were as flawed as ours when nobles built over public alleys, entire districts flooded during rains. Sound familiar? Today's megacities from Mumbai to Mexico City face identical battles between elite interests and shared infrastructure, proving urbanization's growing pains transcend millennia. Economists lean over these same tablets with different questions. UCLA's Dr. Robert Englund traces modern market principles to Mesopotamian trade networks, where standardized silver shekels enabled commerce from Crete to the Indus Valley. One tablet from Ashur details an ancient futures contract, a merchant prepaying for next season's tin shipment at fixed prices, essentially hedging against inflation. Yet their system had cracks. When debt spirals threatened social stability, rulers issued clean slate decrees erasing obligations, a radical measure some modern economists argue could alleviate today's student loan crises. The most urgent lessons emerge from environmental studies. Soil analysis reveals how intensive irrigation gradually salted fertile fields, forcing crop shifts to date palms. Dr. Jennifer Pornell at the University of South Carolina maps this against satellite images of modern Iraq, where abandoned farms follow the same toxic patterns. They engineered solutions to buy time rotating crops, importing food, but ultimately couldn't escape the ecological bill. She notes, the parallel to California's sinking aquifers or Brazil's deforestation is uncomfortably precise. Historians like Oxford's Dr. Elena Robson warn against viewing Mesopotamia as a cautionary tale. It's a laboratory, she insists. Their 12 generations of scribble families preserving knowledge through collapses offer models for digital archivists today. When Ashurbanipal's library burned, baked clay tablets survived where parchment would have vanished, a lesson in durable data storage for an age of fragile cloud servers. This isn't just about connecting dots between past and present. It's about recognizing that humanity's oldest experiments still pulse with relevance. The next time you tap a digital contract or check a weather app, remember, you're navigating systems first sketched in Cuneiform. History isn't a shadow we've outgrown, it's the ground we walk on, layered with solutions and warnings we've yet to fully heed. The real innovation isn't in inventing new answers, but in finally listening to the ones whispered to us across 5,000 years. Mesopotamia wasn't just a place, it was a revolution in how humans lived together. Imagine a world where every transaction relied on memory, where disputes were settled by whoever shouted loudest, where cities couldn't grow beyond what one person could manage. That was humanity's reality before the mud-brick streets of Ur and Uruk gave us the blueprint for modern life, the mundane act of writing a grocery list. It started here with temple scribes tallying sacks of barley, the concept of justice carved into stone, born from Hammurabi's Code, insisting that even kings weren't above the law. These weren't just inventions, they were seismic shifts in human potential, turning chaos into order one clay tablet at a time. What's astonishing isn't just how much they created, but how thoroughly we've forgotten their fingerprints. Every time you check the clock, you're using their base 60 math. Every legal contract you sign traces back to their clay tablet agreements. Even the idea of a weekend, though they'd balk at our leisure, stems from their lunar calendars dividing time into manageable chunks. Mesopotamia's genius was making the extraordinary seem ordinary, embedding their innovations so deeply into daily life that we stopped noticing them. Yet their story isn't just a celebration, it's a mirror. When we wrestle with climate change, we're reliving their battles with salinized fields and erratic floods. When we debate wealth inequality, we echo their struggles with debt spirals and elite privilege. Their solutions were imperfect, brutal even, but their resilience holds clues. They proved civilization isn't a fixed achievement, it's a continuous negotiation with failure. Every collapse, Akkad, Babylon, was followed by reinvention, as if they understood that progress isn't linear but cyclical. So what can we learn from people who turned marshland into metropolises 5,000 years ago? Perhaps it's this: no challenge is insurmountable when creativity meets collective action. They didn't have our technology, but they had something just as powerful: the audacity to believe chaos could be engineered into order. As we face our own existential tests, their legacy isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation. If they could build civilization from scratch, what's stopping us from reimagining it anew? Now it's your turn. Which Mesopotamian innovation shocks you the most? Could you imagine a world without their contributions? Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going across the millennia. And if you're hungry for more hidden histories that shape our present, don't forget to explore further with us. The past isn't just behind us, it's beneath our feet. In every law, every ledger, every moment we